To win a cynical bet with his rivals, a Playboy billionaire must get a hard-working, down-to-earth coffee shop owner who openly despises his type to genuinely fall for him in 30 days without revealing his wealth. But as he spends time in her world, the bet becomes the last thing on his mind until his rivals threaten to expose everything. Enjoying the story so far? Hit that like button and subscribe for more heartwarming tales of unexpected love and second chances. Now, let's dive into Ethan and Claire's journey. The frantic morning rush at the daily grind was Claire Mitchell's natural habitat. Steam hissed from the espresso machine like a punctual dragon, mingling with the rich aroma of dark roast coffee and the sweet scent of cinnamon from the pastries nestled under the glass counter. Outside, the crisp October air of Portland, Oregon, nipped at the noses of bundled-up commuters hurrying past her large storefront window, many of whom would soon duck inside for their caffeine fix, seeking refuge and revitalization within the warm, inviting glow of her small shop. The worn wooden floors creaked comfortably underfoot, and the mismatched chairs tucked around small tables invited patrons to linger, fostering a sense of community Claire had painstakingly cultivated over 5 hard-won years. Claire moved with an efficiency born of practice and passion, grinding beans with a rhythmic whir, tamping espresso grounds into the portafilter with precise pressure, steaming milk until it reached that perfect, velvety microfoam consistency. Her hands danced between machines and mugs, all while managing a warm, personalized greeting for her regulars. "Morning, Mrs. Gable. Extra foam latte coming right up," she chirped, already knowing the order. "Ben, your usual Black Thunder, ready?" "In 60 seconds," she promised the perpetually hurried bike messenger, grabbing a paper cup this time. Her worn brown apron, inevitably dusted with flour and marked by faint coffee stains despite nightly washings, was practically a second skin. Her auburn hair, thick and prone to rebellion, was pulled back in a practical but slightly messy bun, stray strands escaping to frame a face that was earnest and open, currently etched with the friendly concentration of someone doing what they loved, even amidst the chaos. Freckles scattered across the bridge of her nose, remnants of a summer spent sourcing beans at local farmers' markets, were barely visible under the soft indoor lighting. She handed off a steaming mocha to a grateful college student, flashed a genuine smile that reached her warm brown eyes, and wiped down the already clean butcher block counter when the bell above the door chimed its familiar, cheerful tune announcing a new arrival. Claire glanced up, her practiced greeter's smile, ready, expecting another familiar face joining the queue, but she stopped mid-wipe, her smile faltering slightly in surprise. He wasn't a regular. Definitely not. And he wasn't the usual lost tourist or hurried office worker. He stood just inside the door, framed by the bright morning light, hesitating, for only a fraction of a second, but long enough for his presence to register as different. He took in the cozy chaos of the small shop, the steaming machines, the clatter of ceramic, the low hum of conversation, with an air of quiet observation. He was dressed simply, almost startlingly so, for Portland's often trend-conscious crowd. Faded blue jeans that looked genuinely worn, not expensively distressed, hugged lean legs. A soft grey Henley peeked out from under an open, slightly frayed plaid flannel shirt in muted greens and blues. Sturdy-looking leather boots, scuffed at the toes, suggested actual work or walking, not just a fashion statement. A subtle shadow of dark stubble covered a strong jawline, and his dark, thick hair was casually tousled, as if he'd impatiently run his hands through it without the aid of a mirror or product. Yet, despite the unassuming attire, there was an undeniable aura about him, something in his posture, relaxed but grounded, occupying his space with effortless confidence, something in the way he surveyed the room, not with judgment, but with a calm, assessing curiosity. And something in his eyes. When they briefly met hers across the busy room, Claire felt an unexpected jolt. They were a striking shade of deep, penetrating blue, sharp, with an intelligence that seemed to take in everything at once. Shaking off the momentary pause, Claire offered her default friendly but busy smile, the one honed by thousands of customer interactions. "Hi there. Welcome to the daily grind. What can I get for you today?" He approached the counter, navigating the tight space between tables with an easy, fluid grace that again seemed slightly incongruous with the rugged clothes. Up close, the blue eyes were even more intense, holding her gaze for a beat longer than typical. He scanned the handwritten menu board above her head, his gaze lingering for a moment on the specials, pumpkin spice comfort and maple pecan dream, before returning to her. "Just a black coffee, please," he said. His voice was smooth, a resonant baritone deeper than she might have expected, cultured yet without any discernible regional accent. Just standard American broadcasting neutrality, making him even harder to place. "All right," Claire nodded, turning automatically to grab a sturdy ceramic mug from the stack. The Daily Grind proudly championed real mugs for customers staying in a small stand against the tide of disposable culture. "For here or to go?" "For here," he replied, his gaze following her movements. He pulled a worn brown leather wallet from the back pocket of his jeans as she filled the mug from the large bun brewer, the dark liquid steaming invitingly. He didn't fumble, didn't seem rushed or impatient, despite the line forming behind him. He simply waited, observing. She placed the heavy, comforting mug on the counter between them. "That'll be $2.75. He handed her a crisp $5 bill. As their fingers brushed briefly in the exchange, a faint, unexpected electrical tingle shot up Claire's arm, making her snatch her hand back perhaps a little too quickly. "Static electricity," she told herself firmly, ignoring the slight flush creeping up her neck. "Or maybe I really need to eat something." She turned to the old-fashioned cash register, its satisfying clang echoing slightly as the drawer sprang open. "Keep the change," he said easily, his voice calm as he picked up the mug, cradling it in his hands. "Oh," Claire paused, looking up, slightly surprised again. It wasn't a huge tip, barely over $2, but his delivery was completely casual, lacking the performative generosity some customers displayed. It felt natural. "Thanks very much," she said sincerely, pushing the bills back into the drawer. "Cream and sugar station is just over there by the window if you need anything." He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, those intense blue eyes lingering on her face for a moment longer than strict politeness required. "Thanks, appreciate it. Place has a good feel to it." The compliment sounded genuine, less like flattery and more like a simple observation. "We try our best," Claire replied, already turning her attention to the next customer, a woman juggling a laptop bag and a phone. "Hi, Sarah, the usual?" The man didn't reply immediately. Claire, while focusing on Sarah's order for a non-fat vanilla latte, was peripherally aware of him moving towards the small condiment station near the front window. Stealing another quick glance as she steamed milk, she saw he wasn't adding anything to the coffee. He was just standing there, holding the warm mug between both hands, looking out at the bustling Portland street, watching the flow of pedestrians and cyclists, then turning his gaze back towards the counter, his expression thoughtful, almost meditative, entirely unreadable. "Okay, definitely not a regular," she confirmed in her mind. "Doesn't seem like a tourist either. Maybe a writer looking for atmosphere, or just someone killing time before a job interview. Whatever his story, he was an intriguing anomaly in her otherwise predictable morning rhythm, a quiet island of stillness in her sea of productive clamor. She mentally pushed the thought aside. She had lattes to foam, orders to take, inventory to check later, and a business, her livelihood, her dream to run. She couldn't afford distractions, especially not potentially complicated ones who looked like him, radiating that quiet intensity beneath a deceptively simple surface. Meanwhile, Ethan Cole, or rather, Ethan Smith for the next 30 days, took a slow, deliberate sip of the black coffee. It wasn't the rare single-origin geisha beans, meticulously brewed via a siphon by his personal chef back in his sterile penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park in New York. But it was surprisingly decent, hot, strong, robustly flavored and utterly unpretentious, real, just like the place itself, with its slightly worn charm and genuine warmth, just like the woman bustling efficiently behind the counter. Claire Mitchell, he thought, the name and key details from the discreet background check echoing in his mind. Owner and operator, The Daily Grind. 5 years. Built from scratch after cashing out a small inheritance, fiercely independent, works 70-hour weeks, active in local business association, reputation for being kind but no nonsense. Harbors a distinct aversion to ostentatious displays of wealth and smooth-talking men after a particularly nasty breakup with some trust fund leech named Chad. The investigator had helpfully included that tidbit. She was, in short, the perfect unwitting target for the absurd alcohol-fueled bet he'd impulsively made with Julian Vance and Marcus Thorne less than 12 hours ago. They'd been lounging in the exclusive, smoke-filled back room of a ridiculously overpriced Manhattan club, $100 whiskeys sweating in their hands, the conversation drifting into boasts and cynical pronouncements about the predictability of human nature, especially where money and charm were involved. Ethan, bored with their usual games and perhaps a little too insulated by his own success, had claimed he could make any woman fall for him, given the chance. Julian, ever the antagonist, had scoffed. Not any woman, Cole. Not one who genuinely despises our kind. Find me a truly down-to-earth, unimpressed woman, and I bet my vintage Aston Martin DB5 you can't make her fall for you, the real you hidden under the expensive suit, in 1 month. Marcus had chimed in, and you can't use the money card, Ethan. No private jets, no $1,000 dinners, no casual mentions of your stock portfolio, just you, whoever that is. Fueled by arrogance, boredom, and several glasses of that overpriced whiskey, Ethan had accepted instantly. The challenge itself was the lure, far more than the car he didn't particularly need or want. His ever-efficient team had scrambled overnight. Julian, using his own network of informants, mostly disgruntled former employees and society gossips, had identified Claire Mitchell in Portland as the ideal candidate, successful in her own small sphere, resolutely unimpressed by wealth, and geographically distant from Ethan's usual haunts. Within hours, Ethan was on his private jet, parked discreetly at a smaller airfield outside Portland, his team having assembled the Ethan Smith persona, a moderately successful freelance photographer taking a sabbatical to rediscover his artistic roots and capture authentic American life. They'd procured the worn clothes from vintage shops, rented a beat-up but reliable Ford Ranger truck, currently parked 3 blocks away, provided a burner phone with a local number, and concocted a plausible backstory involving modest savings that were rapidly dwindling, necessitating cheap coffee and perhaps eventually some temporary work. Looking at Claire now, completely focused on frothing milk, her brow furrowed in concentration, a tiny smudge of espresso grounds clinging stubbornly to her cheekbone that she hadn't noticed, Ethan felt a flicker of something unexpected stir beneath the cynical amusement. It wasn't guilt, not yet anyway. He rarely felt guilt, it was more like genuine intrigue. She hadn't fawned over him, hadn't seemed intimidated by his height or the intensity he knew he sometimes projected unconsciously. She hadn't even given him a second glance beyond basic, efficient customer service politeness after their brief transaction. She was completely absorbed in her work, in her little world. This might actually be harder than I thought, he mused, a slow, almost predatory smile playing on his lips as he leaned his shoulder against the cool glass of the window, pretending to watch the street while actually observing her, the way she tucked an escaping strand of auburn hair behind her ear with the back of her hand. The slight frown of concentration as she swirled a delicate pattern into the foam of a latte. The easy camaraderie she shared with her regulars. Or, maybe, the smile widened slightly, much more interesting. The game was officially on. All he had to do was play the part of the humble, slightly lost photographer convincingly for 30 short days. Convince Claire Mitchell, the woman who despised everything his real life represented, to fall for the man he was pretending to be. Piece of cake. He took another sip of the coffee, the warmth spreading through him, a stark contrast to the cool calculation running through his mind. He'd need a reason to come back, a reason to linger. He glanced around the cozy shop again, his eyes landing on a bulletin board near the entrance, cluttered with local flyers, yoga classes, band gigs, lost cat posters, and a small, neatly typed notice seeking part-time help for weekend shifts. Perfect. Ethan let a couple of days pass, establishing a quiet pattern. He became a semi-regular fixture at the daily grind during the calmer mid-morning hours, always choosing a small table near the window. His battered sketchbook lay open, a convincing prop, though his pencil rarely moved. Mostly he observed Claire. He watched the fluid economy of her movements behind the counter, the way she handled a notoriously demanding customer, a Mr. Henderson, who always complained the milk was too hot or not hot enough, with unshakable, firm politeness. He saw the genuine warmth bloom in her eyes when she chatted with Mrs. Gable, an elderly woman who clearly came as much for the brief companionship as for the extra foam latte. He noticed the focused intensity she brought to balancing her books on an old laptop perched precariously on the end of the counter during a rare quiet moment, biting her lower lip slightly in concentration. Each observation was like a small stone dropped into the deep well of cynicism he'd cultivated over years. She wasn't performing. She was simply real. Hard-working, authentic, seemingly immune to the kind of superficial charm and veiled power he usually deployed without a second thought. This complicated things. The bet felt increasingly juvenile, yet the challenge of winning her over, authentically, paradoxically, grew more compelling, tangled now with a reluctant admiration. He needed a better reason to be around, an excuse to breach the customer-barista barrier. The small, neatly typed, "Help Wanted" sign pinned to the cluttered community bulletin board remained his best bet. On the third morning, after paying for his usual black coffee, he lingered purposefully as the small queue evaporated behind him. "Excuse me," he began, choosing his moment as Claire wiped down the espresso machine's gleaming steam wand. She looked up, her brown eyes holding a neutral, professional curiosity, wiping her hands on her ubiquitous apron. "Yeah? Can I help you with something else?" "Actually," Ethan tilted his head towards the bulletin board near the door. "I happen to. Notice the sign, 'You're looking for part-time help'?" Claire paused her cleaning, turning to face him fully. A flicker of surprise crossed her features before settling back into professional neutrality. "Yeah, just for weekends right now. Mostly Saturdays. Maybe the occasional Sunday shift if Maria, my regular weekend person, needs off. It's mostly covering the rush and helping with prep and closing." She eyed his sketchbook, then his generally non-barista vibe. "Are you interested?" Ethan summoned the persona of Ethan Smith, the slightly adrift photographer. He ran a hand through his hair, affecting an air of hesitant hope. "Actually, yeah. I think I might be. My name's Ethan Smith, by the way." He offered a hand across the counter, a gesture more formal than his usual interactions, but fitting for a potential job application. Claire hesitated for only a fraction of a second before wiping her own hand decisively on her apron and shaking his. Her grip was firm, surprisingly strong, calluses faint but definitely present. The handshake of someone who wasn't afraid of hard work. "Claire Mitchell. Nice to meet you, Ethan." That faint, inexplicable tingle sparked again where their skin touched. He registered it, then deliberately filed it away. "Do you have experience in food service or barista work specifically?" "Some, yeah, from a while back." Ethan lied smoothly, accessing the fictional resume stored in his mental files. "Worked my way through a couple of years of college waiting tables and pulling espresso shots. Small place, nothing fancy like this," he added, gesturing vaguely around the cozy shop. "But I know my way around a portafilter mostly." He tacked on a self-deprecating smile he hoped looked genuine. "Might be a bit rusty, though. It's been a few years." He needed to seem capable enough to hire, but not so skilled that it raised red flags. Where would a struggling photographer get top-tier barista training? Claire studied him for a long moment, her head tilted slightly, her gaze thoughtful. Could almost hear the internal debate. Seems polite enough. Doesn't look like a total flake, though the artist type can be unreliable. Says he has experience, but how much? And why does a photographer want this kind of job? Is he desperate or just bored? "Okay, well, the thing is, Ethan," she said frankly, leaning her hips slightly against the counter, her tone shifting from purely professional to slightly cautionary. "It's not glamorous work at all. It's early mornings dealing with intense rushes where you don't have time to breathe, lots of cleaning, endless stocking, the occasional plumbing mishap in the back." She gave a wry grimace, You know the drill if you've done it before, and honestly, the pay isn't huge. She named an hourly wage. It was respectable for Portland's service industry, fitting for a small independent business. But Ethan calculated it would take him roughly 3 weeks of working weekends here to afford the bottle of wine Julian had casually opened last night. The internal disconnect was jarring. I get it, Ethan nodded, injecting as much sincerity as he could muster into his voice. Believe me, I'm not expecting glamour. He gestured with his coffee mug, playing the part. Look, my photography work is still my freelance, which is code for feast or famine, and lately it's been leaning heavily towards famine. He let out a small put-upon sigh. I came out to Portland a few months ago, hoping the change of scenery would get the creative juices flowing, capture some authentic moments, you know. But my savings are taking a nosedive faster than I budgeted for. A steady weekend gig, even a basic one like this, would make a huge difference right now, help me stay afloat while I try to land some projects. And frankly, he leaned in a bit, lowering his voice slightly as if sharing a confidence, I could use the structure. Too much artistic freedom sometimes just leads to too much staring at blank walls and questioning my life choices. He saw a flicker of something soften in her, eyes understanding, maybe even a touch of weary sympathy. She, more than anyone, likely understood the relentless pressure and financial precariousness of pouring your heart into something you built yourself, of chasing a dream against the odds. Okay, she said slowly, the single word carrying the weight of her decision. Tell you what, can you come in this Saturday morning, let's say 7 a.m. sharp? We can do a trial shift, 4 hours. See how you handle the Saturday morning chaos. See if it feels like a good fit for both of us. No promises, she cautioned, holding his gaze steadily. But if you can keep up, follow instructions, and don't burn the place down or scare the regulars, we can talk afterwards. Saturday at 7, absolutely, I'll be here, Ethan confirmed quickly, careful not to sound too eager, though relief washed through him. Thanks, Claire. I really appreciate you giving me a shot. Don't thank me yet, she warned again, though the corners of her mouth tilted up in a small, almost reluctant smile. Just be here on time. Wear comfortable shoes and be ready to work hard. I will be, he promised, meeting her gaze. For a moment, the transaction felt real, just a guy needing a job, a boss giving him a chance. Then the memory of the bet, of Julian's sneering face, intruded. He pushed it down. He finished the last of his coffee, deposited the heavy ceramic mug in the designated bus tub with a quiet clink, and gave her a final nod before heading out into the increasingly bright Portland morning. The bell chimed his departure. Outside, walking down the block towards his inconspicuous rented truck, Ethan allowed himself a private smirk of satisfaction. Phase 1 of infiltration, complete. Now came the truly challenging part, actually performing hours of manual labor convincingly, without betraying the fact that his hands were more accustomed to multi-million-dollar contracts than scrubbing. Milk frothers. This required a different kind of performance art. Saturday morning arrived with the ruthless punctuality of a 6 a.m. alarm clock, an hour Ethan hadn't voluntarily witnessed in years without the justification of an international flight. Dressed in another carefully curated struggling artist uniform, clean but faded dark jeans, a plain grey t-shirt that wasn't designer but fit well, and the same scuffed boots, he pushed open the door of the daily grind at precisely 6:55 a.m. The familiar smell of coffee already hung heavy and comforting in the air. Inside, the lights cast a warm glow, but the shop was peacefully quiet, filled only with the low hum of the refrigerators and the gurgle of the first large batch of drip coffee brewing. Claire was behind the counter, tying the strings of her practical brown apron, her auburn hair already secured in its usual functional bun. She looked focused, businesslike, ready for battle. "Morning," she greeted him, her tone professional but not unwelcoming. She gestured towards the brewer. "Glad you made it. Coffee's fresh. Help yourself. Then I'll give you the nickel tour, and we can get started on morning prep before the first wave hits." The next 4 hours were an exercise in controlled chaos and feigned competence. Ethan, a man who could orchestrate complex corporate mergers and navigate treacherous boardroom politics with icy precision, found himself surprisingly, frustratingly clumsy at tasks requiring fine motor skills, speed, and constant spatial awareness in a cramped environment. His first attempt at steaming milk for a latte resulted in a scalded, bubbly mess that more closely resembled dish soap than microfoam, earning a patient but firm correction from Claire. "Okay, keep the steam wand tip just below the surface. At first, hear that gentle hiss like tearing paper, not a high-pitched scream, and keep the pitcher moving, create a whirlpool. Got it? Try again." He fumbled with the ancient, non-touchscreen cash register, momentarily forgetting which button opened the drawer, and gave someone the wrong change, an error Claire spotted and smoothly rectified before the customer even noticed. He nearly took out a display of local pottery mugs with a misplaced elbow while restocking the pastry case during the peak of the rush, earning a sharp, "Whoa, careful there," from Claire. He discovered muscles in his back and shoulders he hadn't known existed, aching from bending to scoop beans, lifting heavy milk crates, and constantly being on his feet on the hard floor. His pristine white t-shirt quickly acquired mysterious smudges. This was, he conceded internally with grim humor, significantly more demanding than his usual Saturday morning routine, which typically involved a leisurely brunch, followed by perhaps deciding which multi-million-dollar asset to acquire next. Yet he wasn't entirely useless. His mind, honed by years of processing vast amounts of complex information, quickly absorbed the drink recipes, the custom orders of regulars Claire pointed out, and the efficient workflow she'd established. He was surprisingly adept at anticipating needs, noticing the sugar dispensers were low before they became empty, seeing that the stack of napkins was dwindling, keeping the often neglected condiment station tidy amidst the flurry. He handled customer interactions with a polite, calm demeanor, managing a friendly smile, even when faced with convoluted orders or impatient sighs. Claire, while correcting his technical errors, seemed to quietly appreciate his unflappable presence at the register and his willingness to tackle the less desirable tasks. He cleaned. Without being asked twice, he wiped down sticky tables, cleared abandoned cups, swept up spilled coffee grounds, and even volunteered to tackle a rather unpleasant overflowing trash situation in the back alley, a task that involved wrestling damp, heavy bags into an equally damp dumpster. He did it efficiently and without complaint, earning a genuinely surprised but approving nod from Claire when he returned, wiping grime from his hands. "Okay, Ethan," she finally said around 11:15 a.m. as the initial tidal wave of caffeine-starved Portlanders subsided into a steadier, more manageable stream. She leaned wearily against the back counter for a moment, unscrewing the lid of a reusable water bottle. "Well, you didn't burn the place down or poison anyone, so that's a start." A hint of humor touched her eyes. "You're definitely a bit rough on the espresso machine, and your milk steaming needs serious work." She took a long sip of water before continuing. "But you learn fast, you hustle, you follow directions, and you're not afraid to actually get your hands dirty and do the crappy jobs." She met his gaze directly. "Honestly, that counts for a lot more than perfect latte art on day one." Ethan felt a ridiculous, disproportionate surge of pride warm his chest. He'd received global accolades for business achievements, been lauded in financial magazines, commanded rooms full of powerful people. But this simple, unadorned acknowledgement from this hard-working woman, standing in her slightly stained apron, in her small beloved coffee shop, felt different. It felt earned, real. "Thanks," he said, and the word came out slightly breathless. He wiped a bead of sweat tracing a path down his temple with the back of his arm. "Definitely rusty, like I said. Lots to improve. But I'm willing to learn if you're willing to teach." "Good," she nodded, a more genuine smile appearing. "Because Lord knows Maria could use the backup, and my sanity could use a break." She pushed herself off the counter. "All right, Ethan Smith, the weekend job is yours if you still want it after experiencing the glorious reality." She gestured broadly around the still busy shop. "I definitely still want it," Ethan confirmed, perhaps a little too quickly. He met her gaze, and for a second, the bet, the lies, the entire ridiculous charade, faded. There was just him, her, and the shared satisfaction of having survived a chaotic Saturday morning rush together. He was in. The following weekend settled into a surprising new rhythm. Ethan Cole, masquerading as Ethan Smith, became a regular if somewhat enigmatic fixture behind the counter, at the daily grind. He got better at the job. His movements behind the counter became smoother, less hesitant. His lattes began to occasionally resemble actual shapes, a lopsided heart here, a vague fern there. He learned the names and increasingly complex orders of more regulars, finding a strange satisfaction in the simple, predictable human connection of serving someone their essential, morning or afternoon ritual. He even started to recognize the quiet satisfaction Claire clearly felt in creating this small hub of community. More significantly, outside the frantic peak hours, he started talking to Claire. Properly talking. Not just exchanging pleasantries or work instructions, but actually conversing. In the lulls between rushes while restocking heavy bags of coffee beans side by side in the cramped storage room, or during the quiet, shared moments wiping down counters after closing, fragments of conversation began to weave a tentative, unexpected connection between them. He learned about her unwavering passion for coffee, not just as a business, but as a craft. She spoke animatedly about the nuances of different beans, the importance of ethical sourcing, and how she'd once spent 3 weeks in Costa Rica on a shoestring budget, volunteering on small, family-run farms just to understand the process from cherry to cup. He learned about her quiet dream of eventually saving enough to buy a small batch roaster and begin roasting her own beans on site, controlling the quality from start to finish. He also learned, through careful listening and observation, about the relentless, grinding pressure of keeping a beloved small business afloat in a city filled with coffee shops. He heard the frustration in her voice when she spoke about the landlord, hinting at another rent increase. The anxiety when the ancient glass-front refrigerator started making ominous noises. The sheer exhaustion evident in the faint lines around her eyes some early mornings. He saw the stacks of invoices she tackled late at night after he'd left, the careful way she tracked every expense. He saw the fierce, protective pride she took in her creation, her independence, her ability to make it work against the odds. She, in turn, cautiously began to ask more about him, about his photography. Ethan, becoming increasingly adept at his fabricated narrative, spoke vaguely of capturing landscapes and telling stories through images, of feeling creatively stalled and needing a break from the pressures of finding commercial work. He spoke of appreciating the grounded realness of Portland and the people he encountered at the shop, subtly contrasting it with the superficiality he'd supposedly left behind in a deliberately unnamed city. The irony was not lost on him, though he hoped it wasn't evident to her. He kept his answers intentionally vague, revealing little of genuine substance about his past or present, but embedding enough relatable artistic angst and financial uncertainty to sound convincing, even poignant. One rainy Saturday afternoon, the shop was unusually quiet. Claire was perched on a stool behind the counter, sketching something in a notebook. Menu ideas, Ethan guessed. He was meticulously cleaning the grinders, a task he'd discovered was oddly meditative. Suddenly, a loud crash followed by a string of decidedly un-Claire-like curses erupted from the back room. Ethan dropped his cleaning brush. "Claire, everything okay back there?" "Okay? No, not okay." Her voice was muffled, tight with frustration. "The big espresso machine, it just died, mid-heat cycle, made a horrible grinding noise, and now nothing, zilch, and the weekend isn't even over." Ethan hurried back. The small back room, usually crammed but organized, now seemed chaotic. Claire was kneeling beside the large, stainless steel two-group espresso machine that was the workhorse of her operation, staring at its blank display panel with a look of pure dread. "I just had it serviced 3 months ago," she said despairingly, running a hand through her hair, dislodging her bun further. "This thing costs a fortune to repair, and getting someone out on a weekend is impossible, or costs double. I can't run the shop with just the small backup machine tomorrow. Sunday is almost as busy as Saturday." Ethan looked at the machine. He recognized the brand, La Marzocco. His penthouse in New York had a top-of-the-line, custom version. He'd idly watched the technicians install and calibrate it. He knew intellectually a fair bit about its inner workings, pressure stats, heating elements. But Ethan Smith, the struggling photographer, wouldn't know any of that. He crouched down beside her, pretending to peer cluelessly at the dead machine. "That sounds bad. Is there, like, a reset button or something?" he offered lamely. Claire shot him a look that said, seriously, if only it were that simple. No, it sounds like the pump may be seized, or the heating element blew. I don't know, I'm not a mechanic. She slumped back against the wall, looking utterly defeated. This is going to cost me hundreds, maybe thousands I don't have right now. Ethan felt a sharp, unwelcome urge to simply pull out his phone, call his personal concierge, and have a master technician flown in immediately. Billed to his private account. Problem solved. But he couldn't. He was Ethan Smith. He could only offer sympathy and maybe help her find a repair number for Monday. Hey, he said softly, his voice losing its usual smooth edge. Don't panic yet. Let's look up the manual online. Maybe there's a troubleshooting guide? Sometimes it's something simple like a blown fuse inside. He kept his suggestion deliberately basic. Claire sighed, but nodded wearily. Yeah, okay, good idea. My laptop's out front. While she went to get it, Ethan stayed kneeling by the machine. He quickly, discreetly checked the main power cord connection at the back, felt along the casing for unusual heat spots, peered into the vents. Nothing obvious. When Claire returned, with the laptop, they spent 20 minutes scrolling through technical diagrams and troubleshooting flowcharts that made little sense to Ethan Smith, but were vaguely familiar to Ethan Cole. They tried the few reset procedures listed, checked. The circuit breaker for the building. Nothing. The machine remained stubbornly lifeless. Well, Claire said finally, closing the laptop with a snap. That's that then. Looks like tomorrow is drip coffee and apologies. Her voice was flat, resigned. Seeing her disappointment, her stress so palpable, twisted something inside Ethan. The bet, the game, felt utterly insignificant, even repulsive in the face of this real-world problem, affecting someone he was genuinely starting to admire, respect, maybe even like. Look, he said, making a decision, why don't we close up a few minutes early and let me buy you dinner, pizza, cheap takeout, whatever. Just take your mind off it for an hour. My treat. Think of it as hazard. Pay for dealing with my terrible latte art. He tried to keep his tone light, casual. Claire looked up at him, surprised. You don't have to do that, Ethan. I know I don't have to, he replied, meeting her gaze steadily. I want to. Come on. Misery loves company, right? And pizza. A small, genuine smile finally broke through her worried expression. Okay, Smith. You talked me into it. Pizza sounds actually pretty good right now. An hour later, they were sitting opposite each other at one of the small tables in the now darkened, quiet coffee shop, sharing a large pepperoni pizza from the place down. The street, paper plates balanced on their knees. The simple intimacy of the moment felt miles away from Ethan's usual world of Michelin stars and calculated networking dinners. They talked, not just about the broken machine or shop talk, but about other things. She asked him more about his photography, and he found himself embellishing less, talking more honestly, within the confines of his cover, about the feeling of searching for something authentic, something meaningful to capture. He carefully steered the conversation, asking her about Portland, about places she loved, things she did when she wasn't working, which he gathered wasn't often. She spoke about hiking in Forest Park, about loving the city's quirky vibe, about a younger sister in college she was helping support. As she talked, animatedly describing a favorite viewpoint overlooking the city, Ethan found himself utterly captivated. Not just by her words, but by the passion in her eyes, the way she gestured with her hands, the sound of her easy laughter. He had to physically stop himself from reaching across the small space between them, from tucking a stray strand of auburn hair behind her ear. This is getting complicated, his inner cynic warned him. Remember the bet. Remember who you are. But another voice, quieter but more persistent, whispered, Does it matter? Look at her. Listen to her. Just then, his burner phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. A few seconds later, it buzzed again. Insistently. With a murmured apology to Claire, he pulled it out. A text message from Julian Vance. It wasn't words this time, it was a picture. A crystal-clear photo of the gleaming silver Aston Martin DB5 parked in Julian's climate-controlled garage. Beneath it, a single line of text. She's waiting. Cole. Or is Ethan Smith enjoying slumming it too much? Don't forget the deadline. J. A cold wave washed over Ethan, instantly extinguishing the warmth of the shared pizza moment. The reality of the bet, the ticking clock, the web of lies he was weaving crashed back in. He quickly typed a non-committal reply. Patience, Vance. Art takes time. And shoved the phone back into his pocket, hoping Claire hadn't noticed the sudden shift in his demeanor. But she had. Her smile had faded slightly, replaced by a faint questioning frown. Everything okay? Yeah, fine. Ethan forced a smile, the lie feeling like ash in his mouth. Just work stuff. Freelance life, you know, always hustling. The easy atmosphere between them had subtly fractured. They finished the pizza mostly in silence, the earlier camaraderie replaced by a slight unspoken tension. As they cleaned up and finally locked the shop, Claire thanked him again for dinner, but her tone was more reserved than before. Walking back to his truck alone in the cool night air, Ethan felt a confusing mix of frustration and longing. Frustration at the bet, at Julian, at the lies trapping him, and a deeper, more unsettling longing for the genuine connection he'd felt with Claire just an hour earlier, a connection his own deception was actively poisoning. He leaned against his truck, looking back at the dark storefront of the daily grind. He was winning the bet technically. He was getting closer to Claire, building trust, spending time. But the victory felt increasingly hollow. He wasn't just fooling Claire Mitchell, he was starting to fool himself. And the 30-day deadline, once an amusing challenge, now felt like a rapidly approaching collision course with disaster. The remaining weeks of the 30-day bet blurred into a confusing mix of genuine connection and mounting dread for Ethan. His weekends at the daily grind became the anchor of his week, something he looked forward to with an eagerness that startled him. The physical labor no longer felt like a chore, but a welcome change from the abstract pressures of his real life. The simple rhythm of the shop, the smell of coffee, the easy camaraderie with Claire, it all felt more real, more grounding, than the opulent boardrooms and hollow social events that defined Ethan Cole. He found more excuses to linger after his shifts, often staying late to help Claire close up, sharing tired sighs and easy conversation as they wiped down counters and restocked shelves in the quiet intimacy of the empty shop. One drizzly Tuesday, his official day off from his photography, he'd shown up unexpectedly with 2 steaming cups of tea from a specialty shop across town he knew she liked, but rarely splurged on. Slow day, she'd asked, surprised but pleased accepting the cup. Thought you might need a pick-me-up, he'd replied evasively, leaning against the counter, and maybe some unbiased feedback on these new logo sketches. He nodded towards the notebook lying open beside her laptop, filled with variations of coffee beans and steaming cups. That afternoon, they'd spent nearly 2 hours brainstorming, Ethan offering surprisingly insightful critiques and suggestions that went far beyond casual observation. He spoke about branding, target demographics, and visual consistency with an authority that briefly made Claire raise an eyebrow before he quickly backpedaled, attributing his knowledge to some marketing blogs I read and helping a friend with his band's logo once. He'd even discreetly used his burner phone's sophisticated design apps, a tool far beyond the means of Ethan Smith. While she wasn't looking to mock up a cleaner version of her favorite design, emailing it to her later under the guise of just playing around with an online tool. Her delighted reaction was another sharp pang of combined pleasure and guilt. He was actively helping her, using his skills, his real self, but under false pretenses. The deception felt heavier each day. He even found himself anonymously intervening when the expensive part for the broken espresso machine was quoted at an exorbitant price with a long lead time. A few discreet calls from Ethan Cole's office to a high-level contact at the manufacturer resulted in the part suddenly becoming available, significantly discounted, and express-shipped directly to the daily grind, attributed to a logistical error in their favor. Claire had been ecstatic, calling it a miracle, completely unaware of the invisible hand pulling the strings. Ethan felt a perverse satisfaction mixed with self-loathing. The attraction between them simmered constantly beneath the surface. There were moments, reaching for the same milk pitcher, brushing past each other in the cramped back room, meeting eyes across the counter during a shared, amused glance at a particularly eccentric customer, where the air crackled with unspoken energy. One evening, while walking her to her car parked a block away after a long closing shift, the conversation lulled. Standing under the glow of a streetlight, raindrops glistening in her auburn hair, Ethan felt an almost overpowering urge to close the small distance between them. He saw something flicker in her eyes too, awareness, maybe curiosity, maybe caution, but the image of Julian's mocking text flashed in his mind. This isn't real. It's a game. He clenched his jaw and took a step back, wishing her good night. His voice tighter than usual. Claire too felt the shift. Ethan Smith was kind, hard-working, surprisingly intuitive, and increasingly easy to be around. She enjoyed his quiet company, his dry humor, his unexpected moments of insight. She found herself looking forward to weekends, not just for the help, but for him. But there were still inconsistencies that pricked at her consciousness. His hands, though calloused now from shop work, sometimes moved with an unconscious elegance. His vocabulary occasionally slipped into sophisticated phrasing that seemed out of place. He was intensely private about his past, deflecting personal questions with vague answers about wanting a fresh start. And sometimes, like tonight, she saw a shadow cross his face, a deep-seated tension behind the easygoing facade. She told herself it was just the stress of a struggling artist, but a tiny seed of unease remained. The pressure from Julian and Marcus escalated as the 30-day deadline loomed, now less than a week away. Julian started calling the burner phone, his voice dripping with impatience. "Tick-tock, Cole, are you going to land the fish or not? Or has the little barista proven too tough for the great Ethan Cole?" Marcus sent cryptic emails with links to articles about Ethan Cole's latest, fictional, planted by his PR team, sightings in Monaco or St. Bart's, a subtle reminder of the world Ethan was neglecting. Ethan knew he had to end this. The bet felt repulsive now. The thought of winning by deceiving Claire made him physically ill. He considered confessing everything, throwing himself at her mercy, but fear paralyzed him. The fear of seeing the warmth in her eyes turn to justifiable hatred, of losing the fragile, precious connection they'd built, even on a foundation of lies. He also felt trapped by his own stupid pride. Could he face Julian and Marcus and admit defeat, admit that he'd not only failed the bet, but had also been compromised by genuine feelings? The decision was taken out of his hands on the final Friday before the deadline. It was a busy afternoon. Claire was training Maria, her other part-time helper, on the temperamental espresso machine now miraculously repaired. Ethan was manning the register, trying to stay focused despite the gnawing anxiety about the impending deadline. The bell above the door chimed, and Ethan looked up, ready with a practiced greeting. His blood ran ice-cold. Standing just inside, the door impeccably dressed in a bespoke Italian suit that screamed money and arrogance, was Julian Vance. Beside him, looking equally smug and out of place in the cozy coffee shop, stood Marcus Thorne. They surveyed the room with amusement, their eyes landing directly on Ethan behind the counter, trapped in his faded t-shirt and stained apron. "Well, well," Julian drawled loud enough for several customers and Claire to turn their heads. "Look what we have here. Ethan Cole, the phantom billionaire, playing shopkeeper. How quaint." Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. He saw Claire freeze mid-sentence with Maria, her head snapping towards the newcomers, then towards him, confusion warring with dawning horror in her eyes. "Ethan Cole," she whispered, the name hanging in the air like a death sentence. Marcus smirked, stepping forward. "Indeed. Quite the step down from managing your empire, wouldn't you say, Ethan? Though I must admit," he scanned the shop dismissively, "this place has a certain rustic charm. And the barista," his eyes lingered on Claire with blatant appraisal, "is certainly dedicated. You always did have an eye for assets." Ethan felt white-hot rage mix with paralyzing panic. "Julian Marcus?" he managed, his voice dangerously low. "What the hell are you doing here?" "Collecting, dear boy," Julian said smoothly, approaching the counter. He ignored Ethan and addressed Claire directly, his voice dripping with condescending charm. "My apologies for the intrusion, madam. We just came to settle a little wager with our friend here. You see, the bet was whether the great Ethan Cole," he gestured towards the stunned man in the apron, "could convince a lovely, hard-working, ordinary woman like yourself to fall for him in 30 days without revealing his staggering fortune. All part of a game," he smiled unctuously. "Looks like time's up. So tell us, my dear, did he win?" Claire stared, speechless, her face paling rapidly. Her eyes darted between Julian's smug face, Marcus's amused one, and Ethan's. Ethan, who stood frozen, the color drained from his face, his usual confidence utterly shattered, replaced by raw desperation. She saw the expensive watch peeking, out from under the frayed flannel cuff he sometimes wore. She saw the subtle command in his posture that she'd always sensed but couldn't place. She remembered the miracle repair part, the oddly insightful business advice, the sudden tension when his phone buzzed. It all clicked into place with sickening clarity. The friendly, struggling photographer Ethan Smith didn't exist. He was a fabrication, a lie. She hadn't been connecting with a fellow dreamer. She'd been the unwitting pawn in a cruel, cynical game played by bored billionaires. The kindness, the shared moments, the hints of vulnerability, all of it, potentially. Then act. Tears welled in her eyes, hot with humiliation and betrayal. "A bet," she choked out, her voice trembling. Ethan finally moved, reaching a hand towards her across the counter. "Claire, please, let me explain. It started like that, yes. But don't!" Claire flinched back as if burned, yanking her hand away. "Don't touch me." The raw pain in her voice sliced through the stunned silence of the shop. Customers were openly staring now, forgotten coffees cooling in their hands. "Get out," she whispered, her voice shaking with fury and hurt. "Claire, I said get out!" She screamed, tears finally spilling over, tracking paths through the dusting of flour on her cheek. "Both of you, all of you, get out of my shop, now!" Julian chuckled softly. "No need for hysterics, my dear. Consider the bet null and void." He glanced at Ethan's devastated face with triumphant satisfaction. "Looks like I keep the Aston Martin after all, Cole. Seems even you can't buy genuine affection." He turned, Marcus following, casting one last amused look at the wreckage they'd caused. Ethan didn't move, his desperate gaze locked on Claire's face, which was now a mask of anguish and fury. "Claire, I am so sorry. Please, just listen." "Sorry?" She spat the word out like poison. "You stand there after lying to me for weeks, making me believe, making me feel—" She couldn't finish the sentence, choked by tears and rage. "You think sorry fixes this? You think anything can fix this?" She gestured wildly, encompassing the shop, him, the whole humiliating situation. Was any of it real, any single moment? The raw agony in her question hit Ethan harder than any physical blow. "Yes," he whispered desperately. "Claire, the way I feel, what happened between us, that became real. The bet stopped mattering. You started mattering." But his words couldn't penetrate her wall of pain. "Lies," she sobbed, turning away from him, wrapping her arms around herself. "It was all lies. Please, just go. Leave me alone." Knowing he couldn't reach her now, consumed by a crushing weight of guilt and loss far heavier than any business failure, Ethan slowly, agonizingly turned. He walked out of the daily grind, the bell above the door chiming mockingly behind him, leaving behind the warmth, the scent of coffee, and the only connection that had felt truly real in years. He didn't look back. Weeks turned into a month, then 2. Ethan Cole returned to New York, to his penthouse, his company, his old life. But it felt alien, hollow. He went through the motions, meetings, calls, galas, but the cynical amusement was gone, replaced by a persistent ache, a profound sense of loss. He'd called Julian and Marcus once, informing them coldly that their association was terminated. He didn't care about the Aston Martin or their opinions. He only cared about the wreckage he'd left behind in Portland. He received regular, discreet updates from his investigator. The daily grind was still open. Claire was working longer hours than ever, looking tired but determined. The espresso machine was working perfectly. She hadn't hired anyone else for weekends. She hadn't mentioned Ethan Cole or the incident to anyone, seemingly trying to bury the humiliation. Ethan knew apologies were meaningless without action, without demonstrating genuine change. He threw himself into work, but differently. He started scrutinizing his company's practices, pushing for more ethical sourcing, better employee benefits, launching a foundation focused on supporting small businesses and entrepreneurs. The kind of people Claire championed. He sold off some of his more ostentatious assets, simplifying his life, seeking substance over surface. He was changing, not for a bet, but because the encounter with Claire, however disastrously it ended, had irrevocably altered his perspective. He knew he had no right to re-enter her life, but he had to try, one last time, not to win her back, but to offer genuine amends with complete honesty. One crisp December morning, a special delivery courier arrived at the daily grind before opening hours. It wasn't flowers or extravagant gifts. It was a simple, thick manila envelope addressed to Claire Mitchell. Inside, she found two things. First, a formal, legally binding document transferring full ownership of the small batch coffee roaster she'd dreamed about, top of the line, fully installed by a reputable local company, to the Daily Grind LLC. Included were paid invoices and service contracts. There were no strings attached, no mention of the sender. Second, underneath the documents was a handwritten letter on plain, heavy cardstock. Claire, I know words are inadequate, and sorry doesn't begin to cover the hurt I caused. My actions were inexcusable, born out of arrogance and a profound emptiness I didn't understand until I met you and saw what genuine passion, integrity, and hard work looked like. The bet was real, and it was despicable. But what developed between us, my respect for you, my admiration, the feelings I came to have, that was real too. Terribly real and completely overshadowed by my deception. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that the experience, however painful for you, and ultimately for me, fundamentally changed me. I've spent the last few months trying to become someone worthy of the respect I didn't earn. The roaster is not an attempt to buy forgiveness. It's simply something I know you dreamed of, something you deserve, facilitated by resources I unfairly possess. Please accept it in the spirit it's intended, as a small, tangible piece of amends, offered with no expectation other than hoping it helps your wonderful business thrive. I wish you nothing but happiness and success, Claire. You deserve both. Sincerely, Ethan. Claire read the letter twice, her hands trembling. Tears welled again, but this time they were different, a confusing mix of lingering hurt, surprise, and a flicker of something else. Something unexpected. She looked at the documents for the roaster, the dream she'd worked towards for years, now suddenly a reality. It wasn't the machine itself, but the quiet, no-strings-attached nature of the gesture, the honesty of the letter acknowledging his wrongdoing without making excuses. She didn't know what to feel. Forgiveness seemed impossible, forgetting even more so. But the bitterness that had consumed her began to recede, just slightly, replaced by a weary acknowledgement of human complexity, of flawed people capable of causing great pain, but perhaps also capable of change. Weeks later, the new roaster was installed and running, filling the shop with the incredible aroma of freshly roasted beans. Business was picking up. Claire felt a renewed sense of purpose. One quiet afternoon, she found herself writing a short, simple email to the corporate address, listed implicitly in the roaster's paperwork trail. Mr. Cole, thank you for the roaster. It's remarkable. Claire Mitchell. The Daily Grind. She hesitated, for a long time before hitting send. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't an invitation, it was just an acknowledgement. A tiny crack in the wall of silence. Ethan received the email on his phone during a board meeting. He stared at the simple words, his heart lurching. He excused himself from the meeting, stepping out onto the balcony overlooking the New York skyline. He read the email again. It wasn't much, but it was more than he deserved. It was a beginning, maybe not the beginning of a rekindled romance, perhaps not yet. But maybe, just maybe, the beginning of a long, honest road towards earning back a measure of trust, one carefully roasted coffee bean at a time. He typed a simple reply, Claire, I'm glad. Truly, Ethan. He hit send, a tentative, fragile hope rising within him for the first time in months. The game was over. The real work was just beginning. Thank you for joining Ethan and Claire on their tumultuous journey. Their story reminds us that true connection requires honesty, vulnerability, and the courage to change. If their path from a cynical bet to a chance at genuine redemption touched your heart, please give this story a thumbs up and subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories for more tales of love, forgiveness, and the surprising ways people can grow. We appreciate you being here.